Okay. Good evening, friends. So let us continue with our classes. Perspective is almost over. 1-2 topics are left in perspective, and I was talking about some of the questions that we had to deal with, and one question which was welfare phase of geography makes it an interdisciplinary subject. Elaborate. So key word here was to elaborate. So it makes an interdisciplinary subject. So what essentially we'll be talking about here? Tell me, कैसे लिखेंगे इसे? Anyone? Okay. So can I say that here mainly we'll be talking about that the welfare phase of geography makes it an interdisciplinary subject. So can I say that welfare approach brought into geography led to borrowing of several concepts from various disciplines which has increased geography's interdisciplinary focus. So we can essentially talk about this, and we'll see that in understanding every aspect of welfare whether the questions of what, where, who, or how interdisciplinary focus or approach of study is required. So with this, what we have done, we have paved the way for writing the answer, and I just have to prove वाला काम करना है यहाँ पे. So for example, I can take the aspect of what. So if we talk about what constitutes welfare in calculation of what constitutes welfare, can I say we have to draw from variety of disciplines, variety of knowledges. Like for example, we have to understand the one important aspect of understanding is the resource base. Resource base. And if you talk about resource base, very clearly this field comes from the economics. So here we are talking about not only economics but the relationship of economics to its relationship with with other forces. Like we have to take into account the factor of demography, we have to essentially take the factor of technological development, also we'll have to understand the policies of resource development. So again, then only what we'll be able to do, we'll be able to understand the basic question of how much resources are available. Now, not only this, the objective is not to only understand the resource base. So with this we'll be able to calculate the resource frontier. But beside we have to calculate other things, like we have to calculate the welfare contours. While measuring the welfare contours, can I say that do we need to take into account various viewpoints, whether it is the social, or you'll have to understand the cultural, beliefs of the people. We have to understand the psychological aspects. We'll have to understand the prevailing politico-economic structure. And then only, and many other aspects, and then only we'll be able to understand the welfare contour. Okay? So for example, you can give any example, like for example, if we talk about the reservation policy of India. Did we saw इसमें historical factors भी होगा, that we will try to understand the resources available with union and state government, or you can take any other parameter as well. For example, you can simply take the example of HDI, वो ज़्यादा easy होगा तुम लोगों के लिए करना. So when you are talking about Human Development Index as a resource base or Human Development Index, you will have to take into account the, for example, इसी को लेते हैं. HDI is more easy to deal with. Let us see that. Human Development Index. Now, when we are talking about human development, can I say that we will basically look into the income, which would be in the form of per capita income. would be calculated, but not only per capita income would be calculated, it would also involve calculation of the purchasing power according to purchasing power parity. So it has to be what? It has to be adjusted first of all. Then if you talk about other aspects have to be calculated, like for example, we'll talk about the health. So when we are talking about the health of the people, we'll have to look into the infrastructure which is available. We'll have to look into various parameters. We'll have to understand the parameters of health. We'll essentially have to understand, यहाँ पे HDI मत लिखना, you just talk about human development. You better is human development, or you could have taken the framework which I was talking about yesterday, the PQLI or something like that, जो भी frameworks हैं, like Smith का framework, you could have taken the concept of social welfare, social well-being का जो concept था, you can take that also, and you can show that how many parameters are to be ultimately taken. So various health parameters should be taken. ठीक है. So that is about with respect to health. You will be talking about, you can talk about so parameters हो गया. ठीक है. You'll talk about various aspects of education. So here also infrastructure and various parameters you will be studying. Not only this, you will have to adjust it with various other things, like for example, you have to adjust it with respect to the comparative studies between rich and poor, like poverty indexes, that will give us better idea of what is human development. You'll have to adjust it with respect to gender studies, like the case of gender empowerment measures. You'll have to take the case of environment with respect to the loss of environment which is taking place. So we can definitely adjust it with respect to the green GDP, etc. So basically what happens in all of these, what we require diversity of knowledge. Besides, when we have arrived at these parameters, we'll create what? We'll create indices, and creation of these indices requires, very importantly, what? Statistical procedures are required. Moreover, you will also require here adjust according to area based studies. So you will require the geography of a particular area, understanding of the geography of particular area. So accordingly, we can say that when we are talking about what, etc., there would be variety of type of fields would come into play. Same thing we can talk about with respect to who. So when we are talking about who, first of all, here also we'll have to take into account the factor of resource, but not only resource, we'll also take into account the demographic variations in the society. Then we'll also look into account the sociological characteristics of the society. So within sociological characteristics, whether it is faith, whether it is caste, whether it is gender, whether it is age, so many characteristics would be taken within demographic and sociological characteristics will have to be ultimately taken. You will also take into account the prevailing political culture. For example, if suppose we decide that we'll be giving this much share to someone, maybe the political culture would not allow that. So we'll have to look into the prevailing political culture. So political studies would also be becoming part and parcel of that. So here again variety of aspects are, it is becoming. Then if you talk about where, so where would involve regional studies. And in these regional studies, as we have seen that regional studies are amalgam of various characteristics of an area. So here you will essentially have to also talk about what is the physiography of that particular area, what is the physiography के अंदर ही आ जाएगा ecology of that area, so ecological science. You have to look into the economic aspect of the area and what is the resource base, what is the structure of economy, etc. You will have to look into the demography, you will have to look into the prevailing cultural practices, you will have to look into the political reality of the area. So again it becomes what? It becomes very interdisciplinary. So every aspect of, if you talk about this welfare approach, studying any of these aspects require it, the answers are not that much simple. They are very dynamic and they are very changeable and they are tied with variety of factors, and these factors are studied in variety of branches of study. And thus welfare approach, one very good thing about the welfare approach is that welfare approach was very flexible. In other words, it is basically what? It is a contingent approach. So basically what is the objective of this approach? It is a problem solving approach. Although it doesn't solves, it just highlights the problem, but it is still problem solving approach. So it is not averse to any of the ideas which can be borrowed or used from other fields of knowledge. Okay, so that is basically you can talk about, and it requires lots of data, so statistical, quantitative measures, etc. etc. यही लिखना था इसमें. Question number 2, discuss or distinguish between radical and welfare approaches in geographical studies. अभी हमने radical पढ़ा नहीं है, तो we'll just leave this question. We'll first study radical and then we'll return back to this question. You will remind me that ये question बचा हुआ है. ठीक है? So we'll start with our today's topic, and our today's topic is the topic of environmentalism. Which another question left? That question which was asked in 2018, यार उसको पढ़ के तो देखो. I have explained you every aspect of that. It is just explaining you behavioral approach. What is behavioral approach? You just read that question. The question is saying that write करो, मैं बताता हूँ फटाफट. It is just explaining. It is just you have to. मैंने उसी तरह से कल explanation में I just explained you that point, that what is the basic concept. If you remember, I talked about the concept of social injustice and how this social injustice would lead to spatial inequality. यही था, I think these were the words which were used, spatial inequality. So that is basically you have to talk about, and thus you explain how welfare deals with that, welfare geography. ठीक है. So sometimes they would just use words which might seem complicated, but if you just read the simple logic of that, you will understand that they are basically what? They are nothing but the case of what you already know. You just have to apply that. Okay, environmentalism पे आते हैं. Radical approach I want to take, बाद में लेता हूँ उसको. First simpler ones ले लेते हैं. And if you talk about environmentalism, so what is this basically environmentalism? And here we will be talking about number of things. We'll talk about environmentalism, how it is narrowly referring to certain phenomena, how it broadly refers to which type of phenomena. Okay, so first we'll talk about the concept and definition of modern environmentalism. Okay, so we'll say that despite a general agreement, that is, there is no general agreement that environmentalism, there is a general agreement that environmentalism refers to bringing back the attention to study of interaction between nature and cultures. There remain considerable contention of what actually is environmentalism. So there is lots of views with respect to environmentalism. One general definition proposes that environmentalism refers to concerns for environmental protection, particularly from the harmful effect of human activity. Okay? So see, there is two views on environmentalism, we can say. So environmentalism, we can say, is more narrow view. One is the narrow view of environmentalism and other is the broad view of environmentalism. So if you talk about the narrow view of environmentalism, what it simply says that environmentalism refers to a movement or an approach which essentially sees that what we have to do, this definition is the narrow view. This concern refers to concern for environmental protection. So environmentalism in narrow view is what? It is simply a concern for environmental protection. And protection from whom? From the harmful effects of human activities. From the harmful effect of the human activity. So you can understand that actually this idea of environmentalism is more recent. It is more, you can say, post World War phenomena. And post World War phenomena, what happened? Number of development occurred. One important development which occurred was, it was seen that during the World War, there was very large harm which was done to the environment. Okay, so environment was hurt to very great extent because of the bombing, etc., all those things which happened. So there was too much harm done to the environment. We find that this was the period when industrial revolution was reaching its peak. In fact, the first half of the this 20th century, this was the period when urbanization and industrialization in Europe were almost, Europe and North America, Western world, they were reaching almost their peak, particularly the factor of manufacturing. And manufacturing, as you know, it is so much dependent upon these natural resources. So there was large scale exploitation of the natural resources which occurred. In fact, this was also the period when a number of other activities occurred, like for example, we were able to ultimately reach in space. So we developed the technology to ultimately go in the outer space. And some of the astronomers, they went to the outer space and they saw from away, from the space they saw Earth. And I'll be talking about this aspect more broadly in sustainable development topic. But when they saw Earth, one thing very clearly appeared, that Earth appeared different from other planets. And from there, that concept of Earth being blue, because water is forming, the oceans are forming the major part of the Earth. So it was seen that Earth was basically what, a blue and green type of planet, and was quite different from what was seen on the other planets, very clearly. However, it also looked very clearly that there were parts or patches which were not so much green, and there was lots of destruction which had occurred in those areas, particularly because of the deforestation which had been going on for a long time. So this awareness ultimately came that what we are doing, we have inherited a very special phenomena which is Earth, and this special phenomena, what we are doing through our activities, we are destroying this phenomena, this special phenomena, special gift which can be said to be Earth. It was the same time number of other influential people, they came up with their ideas. For example, another very important activity was, there was publication of Rachel Carson's book, and this was, the name of this book was Silent Spring. And in this book, Silent Spring, Carson talked about that how use of chemicals is destroying this Earth. Okay? Many of you might have seen that movie, that cartoon movie, tha B movie. Have you seen that? It was a very good movie. So something on that line, it was there. So if you talk about this book, quite generated lots of enthusiasm among the people who were concerned for the environment. So it talked about how this use of chemicals, and ultimately it would ultimately affect the phenomena of pollination which is going on, and how ultimately there would be lots of problems which would be generated, and how it would ultimately bring doom for the humanity and the other species which are living. And this book was a kind of eye-opener. So this was one. Another very important, in 1970s there was other phenomena which occurred, like for example, there was one more publication which came from the Meadow et al. And if you talk about, it was nothing other than our limits to growth. Limits to growth. Okay. So again, this was one very powerful publication which talked about that how there is a limits to growth. We are basically doing what? We are breaching the carrying capacity the Earth has. Our numbers are growing so much fast. Particularly, it was very much concerned about what was happening in the developing world. Because after Second World War, developing countries also achieved independence. And they had started their developmental policies. and their population was growing at very fast rate. And because most of the developing countries had large population base, so the actual numbers of growth which was taking place, particularly in countries like India and China, it was very high. So it showed some concern that if the numbers grow in such a manner, then what will happen? There would be a phenomena of population explosion, and ultimately because of that the resources would become scarce, due to which what Malthus had predicted, that there would be ultimately a doom, there would be ultimately what he called, Malthus called it as the positive checks. Lots of problems in the form of famines, wars, etc. would be arising, and this would reduce the number of people living on earth. So they talked about that how if the numbers keep on growing, there would be so much problems which would arise, so much industrial problems, agriculture problems, pollution related problems would be arising, and our numbers growth would ultimately halt. But this growth would not be, the stopping of the growth would not be done by us, it would be done by nature, and nature would impose this upon us. Ultimately, because of that, there would be lots of misery associated with that. Other things also happened. For example, this phenomena was not only limited to the academic field, it was also a kind of environmental movement which was going on in the practical field. So, number of organizations were formed, like for example, was formation of UNEP in 1972. Several NGOs formed, very important among them was the Green Peace. Later on, there was in 1980s, late 80s, there was Brundtland Commission, which came up with the idea of sustainable development. There was other episodes which have occurred later on. Further, it continued. This movement has continued. Earth summits which occurred 1992. Okay. So, number of conventions were formed, Rotterdam Convention, Kyoto Protocol, so many of them have ultimately grown. So, there was a kind of movement also going on, environmentalist movement in the practical field. So, this basic idea that we have to protect our environment from our own harmful activities is what today we call it as the environmentalism. So, this is the modern sense of what environmentalism means. Okay. But if we go into the, yes, our common future, Brundtland Commission report. If we go into the depth of this, if we go into the logic of what this modern viewpoint is saying, we'll come up with number of other ideas. For example, what is this idea all about? It was simply, this idea was that if we do not care for the environment, okay, so this modern idea says that if we do not care for the environment, what will happen? Environment would survive but without humans. Can you understand this point? We'll bring our own doom. And if we go into the history of species, we can very clearly see that extinctions have been very common phenomena. And human species are not very unique as we think of ourselves as unique species. We are not. We are not very unique species. and this means that we can also become extinct. We've seen that in the past there has been extinction episodes due to which 90% of the species of the earth finished. Despite that, evolution continued to provide more and more number of species. So the environment will continue, the earth will continue, but without humans. And clearly, if we go into the basics of this, can we say that this idea portrays that environment is superior to the human beings? Can we say that? Yes or no? Tell me. Environment is superior to the human beings. And if I read this statement, tell me, do I feel that I have heard about this statement before in some of the approach or philosophy? What was that approach or philosophy where we have heard this statement? Very clearly, we have heard this statement in the philosophy of environmental determinism. Environmental determinism. ठीक है? So there, that means, can I say that what we are considering, thus what we are considering as modern phenomena has been part of geographical studies for very long time. Yes or no? At least since modern period. At least since the beginning of modern period. At least since the beginning of modern period. इतनी बात समझ में आ गई? Tell me. Okay. One question was asked by UPSC. I think it was 2014-13 में पूछा था. You will tell me what was this year and what was the marks allotted. This was one of the questions which was asked by UPSC. What was the year? Tell me fast. It was 2015. Okay. Yes, it was 2015. And marks which were allotted, कितने marks का था? I think 15 marks. Yes or no? Or it was a short note? Okay, it was 20 mark. Very good. So there is rejuvenation of environmentalism as a paradigm. We'll talk about this question later on when we'll further study about environmentalism. But tell me one very important thing. Can you now get this idea of this term rejuvenation of environmentalism? Forget about other things, paradigm, etc. We'll talk about. But can you understand, get this idea why it is saying rejuvenation of environmentalism? Because what we have seen, can I say that this environmentalism or environmental determinism was part and parcel of geography. It was the main framework of geography till Second World War. But after Second World War, what we have seen, that there was dominance of quantitative revolution guided by economic determinism. And quantitative revolution guided by economic determinism, it replaced environmental determinism. So geographers stopped using environmental determinism. Okay? So very clearly you can understand this re-emergence. Now, what is the logic that environmentalists give? Because today, if you talk about, today we are living in a modern world, and this modern world is governed by principles of modernism, which developed after the Renaissance period in Europe. Renaissance period in Europe. And very important feature of this modernization or modernism was based upon what? It was based upon materialism. It was based upon materialism, and later on with the emergence of capitalism, it acquired what? It acquired an economic dimensions. It also acquired an economic dimensions, and later on we'll see that this economic dimensions gave way to what we call it as the human development. And human development very clearly is what? It has economic dimensions. Yes or no? It has resource dimensions. Increase of the utilization of resources, consumption of resources. We can say this today's human development is very clearly tied to increase in the consumption of resources. Okay? So the environmentalists which were there, the environmentalists of 1960s and 70s, they put forward an idea that welfare and development, they develop a critique of the economic models. So what they did, they developed critique of economic development, and we have already seen how Smith himself criticized later on, and ultimately they talked about that development also has environmental dimensions. Okay. So what was their basic idea? See, suppose they believe that environment is what? Environment is a common property resource which is essential for our survival and well-being. Our survival and well-being. So they put forward this idea that suppose there are two people, one is A and other is B. So everyone living on earth has right to these environmental resources because they are what? They are common property resource. Okay? But suppose there is A and A ultimately buys a car, SUV. Or A is suppose an industrialist who produces cars. So A is essentially doing what? Suppose he is just chodo industrialist ko. Suppose he is buying a car, an SUV he has brought. So can I say A is doing what? He is emitting several pollutants into the environment. Yes or no? A is emitting several pollutants into the environment. And this means that A is infringing upon the human rights of B. This means he is overusing his share. Or you can say over के बजाय लिखो, you simply write using more than his share of resources. And not only this, what he is doing, he is violating the human rights of B. Human rights of B. So this was the basic idea which was put forward by these environmentalists. But you can very clearly understand this is one idea and there would be other ideas also. So opposite to this, there was an opposite idea also arose, and this idea talked about that it must be on your side, it is not on my side, I checked. Okay. So if you talk about A is using more than his share of resources, violating the human rights of B. But other idea also arose, and it says that if A does not buys car, then what will happen? Employment would not be generated. Not be generated. And thus what will happen? B would not be able to live a life of dignity, because he would not have employment, so he would live very poor life, very bad life. So this is also what? This is also violation of human rights. So very clearly you can understand what they were trying to say. On one side, one viewpoint is saying that environment protection is more important, while other side is saying that development, or more specifically economic development, is more important, as they believe that environment can be dealt with. Any problem happening in environment, we can ultimately take care of this problem. How we have been taking care till now. Like for example, abhi dekha hoga, there is air purifiers now coming, and so much advertisement of these air purifiers you might have seen. So basically, with technological development, we'll be able to take care of all those problems. Don't worry about those problems. More important is what? That we ultimately keep on doing the economic development, because otherwise people will remain poor. They would lead a very, very bad life, and this is not good. Can you understand that among these extreme viewpoints, there would be viewpoints which would be more in between? Yes or no? Tell me. अभी हम देखेंगे some of the viewpoints which would be in between these. Some would agree that okay, economic development is also important, but we have to also protect the environment. Yes, they would try to take a combination of these two. ठीक है? These two viewpoints. So over a period of time, what has happened? The environmental determinism type of environmentalism which was there, which was more oriented towards environment, has given rise to several criticisms and protests against it, this viewpoint. Because originally the type of environmentalism which arose in the period of 50s, 60s, it was like that there is no other choice and we have to go back. So many of the environmentalists, you will see that they would prefer to live in a very, very old type of environment where you are not damaging the environment, you are least damaging the environment, and if possible you stop all these cars, etc., etc. So ठीक है, मतलब it is like कि stop कर दें car, etc., and all these the modern developments which have happened. तो don't you think कि उससे अच्छा कि extinct ही हो जाए? फायदा क्या है फिर? Because we have become so much habituated to all these ways of life that they have become part and parcel of our livelihood, our living. तो उससे बेटर है कि एक्सटिंक्ट ही हो जाओ. So essentially, very clearly, some would not agree with these extreme viewpoints and they would come up with their own essentially ideas. And this has definitely led to what? Has led to development of variety. This has led to development of variety of views on environmentalism. And if you talk about, as a result, the definition of environmentalism has broadened to include all these viewpoints. All these viewpoints, and broadly treat environmentalism treat environmentalism as any such idea which talks about human environment relationship. Human environment relationship. ठीक है. So here we were talking about the narrow view, but today broad view of environmentalism is what? Broad view of the environmentalism treats environmentalism as any such viewpoint which discusses the relationship between environment and humans. ठीक है. तो can you understand now what is the narrow view and what is the broad view of environmentalism? Tell me. That is basically what is this broad and narrow view of environmentalism. ठीक है. So यहाँ पर उसी के बारे में लिखा हुआ है. However, beneath this simple definition lies host of ethical, political and scientific questions such as what is environment? Are humans part of or apart from the environment? What constitutes protection or for what purpose? How is harm established and by whom? Some scholars have replaced the term concern with advocacy in order to emphasize the politicized nature of environmentalism, while others have introduced organizational and or social movement dimensions in their definition. So some are calling it as movement, some are calling it as simply advocacy. These variety of meaning and definitions serve to highlight the spectrum of positions which have come to be recognized under the umbrella term of environmentalism. So here you see origin and evolution of modern environmentalism. It has been suggested that environmentalism emerged relatively in recent times as response to tensions between economic development and its use of natural resources, particularly pertaining to pollution and resource depletion that became focus of academics during 60s and 70s. In this sense, Rachel Carson's Silent Spring proved to be an important exemplar, highlighting the concerns about the impact of pesticides on ecosystem. A decade later, Limits to Growth thesis was developed by a team of scientists, system scientists and computer models challenging the conventional wisdom of unfettered expansion and warn of the impending limits, especially environmental limits to human development and economic growth. This period also saw emergence of environmental movements which culminated in formation of UNEP in 1972 with its agenda on the protection of environment. In general, it can be asserted that environmentalism has a parallel history of rise along with other approaches like humanism, structuralism, etc. Social relevance movement, if you talk about environmentalism, was also part of the discussion during the social relevance movement. Okay. So that is the modern sense how it has happened. Environmentalism is in the past geographies. So since the primary focus or the identifiable element of environmentalism is human environment relations, It has been evident in earlier periods as well. More recently, such concerns can be seen in the works of Romantic poets and artists who highlighted the debates about preservation and conservation of nature, like William Wordsworth, who called for the protection of inherent beauty of nature throughout Europe and North America during the 19th century. Many scholars have argued that this human-environment relationship concern can be taken back to political ideologies of Greco-Roman as well. In fact, it has been asserted that history of environmentalism can be divided into 3 phases. So you can understand, first phase was human in harmony with the environment. So tell me, during this period, humans would have been what? Can I say, during this period, this is the tribal stage of human development? Yes or no? The tribal stage, when we were hunters, gatherers, all those kind of activities, our activities were very limited, primitive. So humans were living in harmony with environment. Okay? So it was a kind of naturalism type of relationship which was existing, and humans were happy during this period. They had basically, because you can understand, tribals have limited needs, they have limited knowledge, and one knowledge they very clearly have, that their survival depends upon the environment survival. So they take very clear, they very clearly try to protect the environment, and that is one of the aspect of their culture itself. So later we will talk about the concept of sacred groves, etc., how in the culture itself it is like they are preserving. So during this period, human beings were basically what? Civilizations were less developed during this period, and they were more like animals. So like animals take care of their environment, these human beings also used to take care of their environment. Similarly, then as development occurred, humans began to be seen as determined by environment, and this was the agricultural stage of human beings. Stage of development of the human beings. Okay? Agricultural state of the human beings. So no matter what, can we say that agriculture is an economic activity which would always be determined by environment? At least till present technology that we have, will it be always determined by environment? Yes or no? Obviously, yes, it would be always determined by the environment. Okay? So this was the period which would have started somewhere around agricultural revolution, and it continued till the industrial revolution. So during this period, the relationship between human and environment can be seen as the one which is determined by environment. Human population continued to grow, their needs continued to grow, but they found themselves that still they could not grow that much because they were limited by the limits which were imposed by the environmental conditions. Then we reached the third stage of development, and this third stage, somewhere in 17th century, 18th century, ultimately the industrial stage, that is the industrial revolution, started. So from here, ultimately what happened? Human became active modifiers of the environment. So now our influence on the environment became very high. We ultimately got those tools and techniques through which we could alter the environment at large scale. Although some say that we already altered the environment even during the agricultural stage. Even during the agricultural stage. For example, we were cutting the forest and we were growing crops. So this was also a very large scale intervention. In fact, if you look into the industrial intervention, it was limited to few cities. But during the agricultural stage, we so much cleared the vegetations. But again, this idea can be contested that in agriculture we are still growing plants. Our way is comparatively more environmental. But with the third stage, our needs grew so much faster, our population grew so much faster that we not only increased the agricultural productivity, there was more expansion of agriculture. For example, with machines, etc., we could expand now the areas of agriculture. And we also, to very high extent, did alter the other aspects of the environment. Okay, so broadly speaking, scholars believe that there have been three stages if we look into the human environment relationship which has existed. Okay. Thus, broadly, environmentalism can be referred to as the same human environment relationship which has dominated the primary theme of geographical study since ancient times. Environmentalism has been part and parcel of geography since antiquity, with the exception of a brief period which coincided with quantitative revolution. Again, this is since antiquity के बाद यहाँ पर full stop लगाओ and इसको cut कर दो. You just simply cut, because even during quantitative revolution actually there was a form of environmentalism which we'll talk about. देखेंगे अभी. The modern environmentalism can be seen as a reaction to anti-environmental tendencies of quantitative revolution, a form of environmentalism which arose during the quantitative revolution. As a result of that came your modern environmentalism. Okay. So again, man environment study or human environment study has been core theme of geographical study since ancient time. It was represented in the theology of ancient Greco-Romans. So theology which was there, many of the gods were basically what Greco-Romans gods were, like अभी भी इंडिया में है. Today is Chhat Puja, and you know very well Chhat Puja is basically what? Here we are worshipping the sun god during the Chhat Puja. So basically what we are doing? We are worshipping the environment. Okay? So similar type of polytheism existed in the Greco-Roman philosophies. So that theology which was present, it was essentially what? It was a kind of environmentalism. We had a particular relation with the environment, and if we are celebrating Chhat Puja, very clearly it is what? It is telling us that the environment is superior. We are believing that environment is superior to us. Okay? So it can also be seen in the deterministic paradigms which prevailed in later periods, either in the form of scientific determinism of Ratzel or in the environmental determinism of Semple. It can also be seen in the balance between human environment relationship which Vidal sought to achieve in possibilism. As a reaction to environmental determinism, if you remember, Vidal saw that the relationship is more balanced than it is recognized by environmental determinism. Thus, he developed the idea of possibilism. So, it is also evident in the areal differentiation approach of Hartshorne as well as the cultural landscape concept of Sawyer. So, we have already studied this. मुझे नहीं लगता है कि I need to explain. इसमें हमने इतना time लगाया है. However, for a brief period which coincided with QR, environmentalism was seen, here keyword is what? Seen, to be lost in the economic concepts and the isotrophic surfaces. Partly as a reaction to this anti-environmental inquiry and partly as manifestation of problems of environmental pollution and resource depletion, contemporary environmentalism rose to prominence. Okay. The trigger was provided, we talked about Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, limits to growth. Isotrophic surface is a surface which has homogeneous characteristics. So सारे models and theories में हम देखेंगे that they assume that the surface is what? Isotrophic. That means there are no environmental variability over the surface. Okay. So everywhere it is like isotrophic surface, so it is homogeneous surface. ठीक है. So that is basically what is we mean by isotrophic surface. ठीक है. So we can very clearly see that environmentalism developed. अभी मैं इसको डेवलपमेंट को फिर से बताऊंगा when we'll study the sub approaches. So just wait for few seconds. Sub approaches in environmentalism. So contemporary environmentalism is characterized by diversity in ideas, practices and organizational cultures to the extent that number of sub forms of environmentalism have been identified. The most cited framework C होना चाहिए वो cited framework is of ecocentrism and technocentrism produced by Timothy O. Riordan. ठीक है. So basically what is this? So Riordan says that if you talk about environmentalism, environmentalism can be broadly divided into two types. One is what we call it as the ecocentric environmentalism. And the other one is what we can broadly call it as the technocentric environmentalism. Technocentric environmentalism. ठीक है. So if we look into Ecocentric position is frequently espoused by NGOs and civil society actors. They present the most significant challenge to the prevailing socio-economic arrangements in the contemporary society. They highlight the intrinsic importance of nature or environment for the humanity. What is the significance of environment? How much we neglect what is given to us. If suppose this, you see here, I am living in Delhi, and you must have heard about the pollution which is occurring in Delhi. And what has happened with just little bit of this pollution coming, and we are like stuck, and it is very difficult to even breathe if you go outside. And you can understand that if we don't respect our environment, what will happen? Maybe we will not survive. There is hardly any chance that we will be able to survive. ठीक है. We have played with the environment, we have done so many land use changes, and what we see today? We see that partly as a result of such modifications in the environment, we are facing this corona crisis. And we are again what? Our normal life routines have been so much damaged, so much altered. It is something like sometimes these days you can understand government is saying, in fact Kejriwal government, Delhi government and all, even central government, all people are so many celebrities, everyone, they are talking about please use mask. In fact today only in US, Biden gave the statement that wearing a mask is not a political statement. It is what? It is it is your national duty, something like that is written. So they are all talking about wearing of the mask. Yes, and the fine, if you are not wearing, 500 से उसको बढ़ा करके 2000 कर दिया गया in Delhi. So that is also there. Now the situation is like I have been so much used to wearing the mask that now if I go outside without the mask, I feel like कि कुछ missing है, something is missing. Really it is like this. I really start feeling कि something is missing, and it is like कि अब I am really afraid कि in future if this continues, You can imagine that living without mask would become very, very difficult, even if suppose situation becomes normal. So it would take a hell lot of time to ultimately leave the mask. We'll find one or other reason for wearing the mask. Okay. So very clearly our living style would be so much affected if we don't respect the environment. And as we said before, this is just a trailer. And the type of catastrophes that are going to unfold in future, it is like as a result of the climate change, we are like, we cannot even imagine many of these things which are going to happen. So movies already, many of the movies were showing about this. 2012 था, कौन सा था, 2012. So we don't know exactly what type of catastrophes would be ultimately emerging. Okay. So that is the impact that it can have. We already saw that if suppose that thermohaline circulations if stop, what kind of catastrophes can emerge. So that is basically the ecocentric environmentalism. Ecocentric environmentalism gives greater preference to environment. So we can say that this type of environmentalism gives greater preference to environment and talks about changing our cultural habits to protect the environment. Cultural habits to protect the environment. So that is what we mean by ecocentric environmentalism. Technocentric, there is a technocentric argument which is frequently articulated by big business organizations such as MNCs and governments that tend to support the status quo and are more in favor of continuing the present models of development, and some maniacs like Trump, etc. Okay. So that is basically the technocentric idea. So this broad division has also been highlighted by Robert Garner in his analysis of approaches. I will come to that. First, the technocentric believes what? Technocentric environmentalism, it gives greater preference to human development. And what it essentially believes, it believes that problems of environment can be solved with development of technology. Technological development would be able to solve these problems. Okay, so that is basically what is technocentric environmentalism. Okay, so this broad division has also been highlighted by others like Robert Garner in his analysis of approaches to environmentalism. He suggests that environmentalism has two main approaches. One is the radical and reformist. So reformist position is fundamentally human centered, that seeks the protection of environment for the benefits of humanity and believe that this can be done without dismantling the structure of modern industrial world. Thus, reformist position is optimistic position similar to technocentric view of environmentalism. In contrast, the radical perspective proposes much more dramatic changes to political, economic and social structures in order to create a harmonious and sustainable relationship between the society and its wider environment. Thus, the radical position is similar to the ecocentric view of environmentalism. Okay, so several others have came to the same conclusion which old Riordan has also arrived at. Okay, so Riordan further demarcates the ecocentrism in two sub approaches. One is Gaianism and other is the communism. So the ecocentric environmentalism can be further subdivided into two main categories. One is Gaianism and other is communism. In fact, we will see that even the technocentric environmentalism can be further divided into two categories. And these two categories are, one is what we call it as the interventionism. Interventionism. And the second one is the case of accommodationism. Accommodationism. ठीक है? So if I we will come to that environmental mitigation approach is variety of type, उसमें भी मिलते हैं योगेश. So if we plot this on this scale, so on the one scale is the idea of determinism, if you remember, and other was, what was the other? It was voluntarism. So determinism is basically what? It is environment is supreme, and in voluntarism what we find? We find that human fully controls its destiny. ठीक है? So if I have to plot, suppose this is the central point, I can plot these at variety of places. Like for example, here somewhere I would plot Gaianism, and here somewhere I will plot interventionism. Somewhere here I will plot accommodationism, and here somewhere I will plot the case of communism. Can you understand what we are doing here? So can we say that these two are more, they represent extreme viewpoint, yes or no? While these two represent what? A kind of balancing viewpoint. Balancing viewpoints. ठीक है? So that is the basic difference. और देखते हैं. So Gaianism is essentially what? It is a deep ecology view. Views the nature as having intrinsic value, and it calls for profound shift in our attitudes and behavior based on voluntary simplicity, rejection of anthropocentric approach, reconnecting with nature by decentralizing power, celebrating cultural and biological diversity, having belief in the sacredness of nature, etc. So many things. Essentially, what is this view? That we have to drastically change our attitudes and behaviors if we want the survival of humanity, because it doesn't seem that we will be surviving in this manner. You can see that it is actually really very true. We have created so many types of dangers for ourselves that it seems to be so much highly true. Like you take the case of nuclear war. It is a threat any time. Anytime it can be triggered, and you can clearly understand, no matter what we say that we have this safeguard, that safeguard, humanity would be finished. Very high chance that people will be able to survive such war. In fact, maybe will bring doom to the nature itself. We don't know. We have this potential to bring those episodes of extinction, mass extinction episodes. Same is the use of chemicals that we are doing. And if you talk about the use of the chemicals, same situation is happening in case of chemicals. We are essentially again altering the environment to so much extent that we don't know whether we will be able to survive or not. So many pesticides that we are using, so many herbicides we are using, and one of the biggest terrorist organizations you must have heard about, Monsanto. And I really believe that we talk about Islamic terrorism. Islamic terrorism मतलब वो छोटा सा वो बच्चा है. It is like वो छोटे बच्चे होते हैं, they are like वो उनको वो प्लास्टिक वाला बंदूक दे दिया, and they are like playing and all those kind of things doing. So Islamic terrorism is like that. These MNCs are the real. Yes, they are like amateurs. Islamic terrorism. These MNCs, what type of terrorism they are doing. As a country, what terrorism America has done, there is no comparison. Before America, it was Europe. So, America is just extension of Europe. So, there is actually no comparison of the terrorism that they are doing. So, we have created so many types of dangers for ourselves that it would be very difficult to see that we'll be able to survive. One mistake and maybe all of us would be wiped out. And third, if you see, the third biggest challenge which is in front of us right now is the climate change. And we are talking about temperature increase, and already so much studies have proved that so much catastrophes are going to emerge. One rainfall hota hai, heavy episode of rainfall, we are like, there is urban flood, life is so much destroyed and everything. One virus came, एक छोटा सा virus, वो rhino virus का भाई आ गया, and you see, a world is like so much disturbed. What will happen when so many viruses would be released once the glacial ice melt? We don't know even how many deadly type of viruses would be released. And even one of these viruses has the potential to wipe out humanity. Okay, so we don't know exactly. This much we have played with the environment. And environment was saying, ठीक है बेटा, खेलते रहो. He was like, big people don't care for small people. So it was like this, but now suddenly you can understand that things are beginning to emerge, and it would go to a point that it would become very, very difficult for us to control, because already we can see the positive feedbacks in motion. And when it comes to the environmental and earth time scale, human time scale is very small. So by the time the negative feedbacks would be triggered and the things might be controlled, by that time there is high possibility that we will not be there to see those times. So much is actually the danger that we are dealing with. It is other thing that the capitalists don't want you to know all these things. The rich people, they don't want to know you all know these things. You don't care for these things. They just want their own benefits. What they will do, I don't understand, because for them it is this life which is more important, and they don't care for the future generations which is going to come, and so many things that they don't at all care for. So none of the medias are serious about this. Okay? None of these medias are serious about this. This should be the debate today. The poverty should be the debate today, because much of this is what is coming from the poverty, the inequality which has been created. Okay? And again, if you talk about, it is all the social aspects which have changed us. It is like we are living in a world, if you like ask, even in your family, suppose you go against the established logics, what will happen? They'll ask you, tabiyat to theek hai, let us go to doctor, what are you talking about? So this would be the first few words. After that, anger, fight, all of those things would emerge. Okay, so that is basically what the Guyanists are talking about, and they are not wrong. Although they are wrong in the sense about with respect to their solution. So for them, the solution, I really believe their solutions is you go back and become tribals. Again, I also don't agree with this viewpoint, because going back is not a kind of solution. It is not possible actually to go back to that type of life. We would not be, then also will not be able to survive. So पीछे गए तो वैसे एक्सटिंक्ट हो जाएंगे बेचारे परेशान होकर के लाइफ से, बिकॉज पीपल आर सो मच यूज टू टुडे. मोबाइल नहीं होता, थोड़ी देर के लिए मोबाइल इधर से उधर हो जाए तो यू नो सो मच डिप्रेशन. इंटरनेट नहीं आ रहा है तो इट इज़ लाइक what we have lost in life. It is very so much difficult to survive. And hunting and gathering, it is, if you tell us to do hunting and gathering in video games, maybe we'll beat those previous ancient times hunters and gatherers. But in real life you can understand कि वो हमारी औकात से बाहर की चीज़ है. ठीक है? So that is basically the case of the Guyanism. So in this view, there is often a strong commitment to direct personal action to protect the nature, improve environment and bring about fundamental societal change. ठीक है? So these are the people who are actually practicing. Guyanists are the people, like vegans you will find, they will not eat meat, etc., etc. They will protect wherever possible. They will not do harm to the nature. So that is what is Guyanism about. Then second viewpoint, within the ecocentrism, it is a more moderate viewpoint. As I said before, Guyanism is what? It is a more extreme view. While communists try to reach towards a more balanced view. And communists, if you talk about, they are basically, you can call them as soft technologists. Other term that has been used for them is they are soft technologists, and argue for development of small scale and community identity in the settlements, work and leisure. So they believe that the main problem has risen because Yes, Satish, I have not seen this social dilemma movie. I have heard so many people talking about that. When I'll get time, I'll definitely see. Okay. So if you talk about a small scale, they believe that the main problem has risen because of the centralized large scale systems. When centralized large scale systems are produced, what is the problem? A capitalist who is totally detached from the ground, and he ultimately takes many decisions of related with human environment. So very clearly he doesn't has any attachment. You can understand, he doesn't has that authentic attitude. He doesn't has the sense of place to care for the environment. And as a result, what happens? Yes, his view is outsider views, the centralization view. So as a result, what happens? Nobody is taking care of the environment. So what communists believe, that the solution to this problem is essentially that you have to dismantle these large scale structures, centralized structures, and move towards community based small scale structures. Community based small scale structures are less damaging to the environment, one. Plus, when their community scale structures, people have attachment, they have authentic attitude towards environment, they have sense of place, they have insiders, there is centering in them. As a result of which, what they do, they take care of their environment. So they believe that the solution to this problem is moving towards small scale community based structures, and this would give rise to a more balanced relationship between human and environment. Like you can understand the commune systems which are there in China, and although it has totally different, it has also produced so much of changes, etc. But overall, it is believed that the small scale structures which are owned by community, in India there are so many examples where, if you talk about the village communities, the local communities, how much they took care of the environment. You go into the tribal societies and you will be finding, you go into the village societies, how much they cared for the ultimately your ponds, etc., or the other natural resources. Okay. So that is basically the level of development that we have to follow. You can understand, like this type of development view was also held by Gandhiji. He also believed in village based development, village model of development. On the other hand, if you talk about now Nehru, he was a more believer in the centralized model of development. Okay. So they want to integrate work and leisure through personal and community level improvements. They give more importance to participation in the community affairs, recognizing the right of minority interests, etc. They are skeptic of modern large scale technology and see the central state authority as anti-democratic institution. Soft technologies have Marxist position and are critical of materialism, and see that the current ecological situation as the byproduct of capitalism. It has been also referred to as the social ecology approach. This has also been referred to as the social ecology approach. So we'll see Marxism, and we'll talk about all these things. We'll talk about this social ecology approach. So very clear, it is very clear that a type of systems have been created where people are using those things which they even don't need. So many people have so many cars. Many people have hobby of buying car. And why? Essentially because in our society, it is the level of consumption you do that determines your status in the society. ठीक है, status in the society. So very clearly you can see how much irrational our society is actually. जिसकी जरूरत भी नहीं है and you are going and spending money for that just to show other people. इससे ज्यादा irrational कुछ हो सकता है? Yes, those celebrities and all those people, they are just hypocrites. I really hate them, most of them. So that is basically the basic idea. And who is getting benefited? It is few individuals who are ultimately getting benefited out of that. ठीक है, so we'll discuss this more in radicalism, more deep about this social ecology approach. But that is the basic crux, that you don't ultimately allow this centralized systems. If you allow the centralized system, this is the main problem that is going to arise. Community based controls are always better, because community is the people who are more near to environment, more near to nature, and their survival depends upon that environment. Thus they will take care of that environment. Okay, so they believe that with this what will happen, our development will also not be hampered, and ultimately will continue to have a very decent life without doing too much damage to the environment. So that is the communist view. Then second, if you talk about technocentric approach, is further divided into two sub approaches. One is what I called it as the interventionist. एक मिनट, ये पहले आ गया, एक मिनट, सॉरी, दिस इज इंटरवेंशनिस्ट. पहले इसको पढ़ते हैं. दिस इज द एक्सट्रीम व्यू पॉइंट. So extreme, this is interventionist. यहाँ पे लिखा भी हुआ है, you can see interventionist. So interventionists are against the claims of environmentalists that people are irreversibly damaging the environment. They believe that benefits of economic development, even if it has negative environmental implications, are more important to the society than the damage caused. They see that environmental crisis identified by other environmental groups is exaggerated and not based on sound science. In essence, they believe that technological development would resolve any damage caused to the environment. So this is basically their idea, कि these things are not taking place, we should not care about this, we should continue to ultimately, yes, ट्रम्प जैसा. पहले हमारे मोदी जी भी ऐसी बातें करते थे, बट अभी उनको थोड़ा सा समझ आ गया है. सो ही इज लाइक मोर better comparatively. He has changed. Before he was one of the videos I remember, in that those videos he was talking about that climate change थोड़ी हुआ है, हम चेंज हो गए हैं. Our capacity to ultimately withstand, acclimatize with nature has changed. Okay, but whatever, welcome, it is good, because one thing which has been done by the government, this government, which has been more positive comparatively, is their investment in the green technologies. That is other thing, that this investment could have been more community oriented. But today we see that the investment is more capitalistic oriented. Whatever be the case, the outcome of this investment in the green technologies will have some positive outcomes. There is no doubt about that. So it is not the ideal, but whatever, something is better than nothing. So if you talk about, that is basically the cornucopian view. So cornucopian view is essentially what? It simply believes that environmental change is natural phenomena. They treat environmental changes as natural. It would always happen. Any species when they do something, they would be changing the environment. Survival of the species ultimately is function of what? It is function of the fact that how much the species is able to develop technology in order to make sure that he is able to adapt, that species is able to adapt itself according to the changed environment. Or it is with development of technology, it can even stop the changes in the environment. For example, you can understand today we are talking about various forms of technologies, like we are talking about carbon sequestration. So what is carbon sequestration? It is essentially a cornucopian or the interventionist approach. They don't want to change the way we live. Carbon markets which are available throughout the world, that is basically what? It is an interventionist approach. And they believe that with technology we will be able to solve these problems. You take the case of other issues like mining, for example. You take the case of mining. Can I say that in mining, we are following the same interventionist approach? We will later talk about the mining policy of India. And mining policy of India basically says that because of economic development, we have to do mining. And later it talks about the mine closure. So mine closure is what? Revegetation of that area. That is what is referred to as mine closure. It is different thing that once you are doing mining, particularly the open cast mining, a situation would be created where the topsoil would be removed, the biological active layer would be removed, and later on it would require lots of investment ultimately to develop this area as a green zone, and it would require lots of time, in fact. Okay. So this is basically what, this is the cornucopian view. So many others, technologies have been there. Some are talking about the plastic eating bacteria, etc., etc. So plastic eating bacteria लेके आओ, ठीक है, प्लास्टिक यूज करना बंद मत करो, and you bring technologies which would solve that problem. ठीक है, बाद में वो प्लास्टिक ईटिंग बैक्टीरिया हो सकता है तुम्हें ही खा जाए, नो प्रॉब्लम. But that is basically the case of cornucopian view. ठीक है. So it is extremist view. On the other hand, if you talk about environmental managers, in case of environmental managers, this is basically the accommodationists. As we say, this is a balancing approach. This is essentially a balancing approach. So accommodationists believe that economic growth and resource exploitation can continue as long as we make adjustments are made to economic mechanisms such as taxes and fees, like pollution tax you keep on taking. Legal rights ensure minimum level of environmental quality. And third, adequate compensation is provided for those experiencing adverse environmental and social mechanism. An environmental manager accepts new project appraisal techniques and decision review arrangements to provide a genuine search for consensus among various stakeholders. So, very good example of environmental managers is the use of EIA, Environmental Impact Assessment. So, they will look into how much damage is caused and they would provide for those damages. If the damage is too much, then ultimately what will happen? There would not be, that project would be rejected, that project would not be carried out. Okay, so this is what is environmental manager. More specifically, accommodationism is what? Accommodationism is a viewpoint which believes that both development and environmental protection are important. Environmental protection, both are important. However, they also believe that drastic changes can bring more problems. So they are in favor of what? They are in favor of that we have to progressively become greener. We have to ultimately progressively become more and more green. So progressively, today for example, you tell me, can I say our energy policy that India has, can I say it is an example of accommodationism? Yes or no? Very clearly it is yes. So if you talk about, today we know that use of coal is highly damaging. It is highly problematic. We know already this thing. But we cannot stop at once. We ultimately have to do what? We have to gradually replace. We have to gradually increase the share of non-renewable energy resources, because at this point the renewable energy resources are not so much developed. So we have to gradually increase their share. We are already working. India is one of the countries which has been doing excellent in the field of solar energy. So we are gradually working towards that goal. So we will progressively become more environment friendly. So it believes in what? Progressive development of greener technologies. That is the basic idea of accommodationism. You take our transportation policy, same thing. Slowly, gradually we started from the Bharat stage vehicles and we kept on modifying them, and today we are talking about the electric mobility. So again, this is what? It is accommodationism principle. Okay. See, the basic idea of accommodationism is what? Basic idea of accommodationism is something like this, that suppose we are doing there is a developmental project. Development project. So tell me, can I say, will this development project create positive? It would be positive with respect to positive impact with respect to development. Yes or no? Yes or no? Tell me. And the more I develop the developmental project, this positives would keep on growing. Yes or no? So this positive would keep on growing. But can I say simultaneously there would be also negatives associated with environmental degradation? Yes or no? This would also be the case, because no matter whatever we do and we exploit environment, resources from the environment, there would be some degree of environmental degradation. ठीक है, देयर वुड बी सम डिग्री ऑफ एनवायरमेंटल डिग्रेडेशन. So there would be negatives associated with environmental degradation. So suppose if I increase this, what will happen with the negatives? It would also grow. Yes or no? If I further increase this, this negative would further grow. Can I say a point would arrive ultimately? There is a threshold. There is a threshold. At this threshold, the positives of development would become equal to negatives of environment. Yes or no? Tell me, ऐसा होगा? And if I grow beyond, if I grow beyond even little bit, the negative would far ultimately outweigh. I'll make it like this. So negative will be what? It would far outweigh, it would overtake. So when it comes to the human beings, tell me, can I say beyond the threshold, beyond the threshold, the satisfaction, or we can say development of humans becomes negative? Yes or no? While below the threshold, the satisfaction or the development of humans remains positive. So even if remains positive, that means here even if there is some environmental damage, there is overall betterment of humanity. Yes or no? There is overall betterment of humanity. Can we say that? We'll see कि इसके this viewpoint हम इसको फिर से हम will be later talking about in sustainable development topic. So there we will criticize this idea, because here it is measuring environment in what? Economic sense. Can you actually measure the utilities of environment in economic sense? Many times we frequently say, when we go to some kind of very beautiful environmental place, open area, sea, coast, etc., etc., many times we say that this coming to this place is priceless. So why we are saying that? Because the satisfaction that we are deriving, you cannot capture that satisfaction in economic sense. ठीक है? It cannot be captured in economic sense. So that is basically the ultimately the case of your accommodationism. So बाद में देखेंगे, this threshold that we are talking about, this threshold is actually what we call it as the sustainable development. Finding, search of this threshold is, what is that? Sustainable development. So we'll achieve economic satisfaction to a level where the degradation done to the environment doesn't exceed the economic satisfaction that we achieve. That is basically, technically what we call it as the sustainable development concept. Okay? So the idea of sustainable development is essentially what? It is a accommodationist viewpoint. Okay? So it is essentially an accommodationist viewpoint. इतनी बात समझ में आ गई? Tell me. So now if I talk about the development of environmentalism. Can I say I can essentially talk about three phases of development of environmentalism in geography we are talking about. In geography. So tell me, can I say first phase is before quantitative revolution? Yes or no? And tell me, before quantitative revolution, which type of environmentalism was present? Can I say the environmentalism was more ecocentric? Yes or no? Ecocentric environmentalism was present, and this was mainly what? It was environmental determinism के फॉर्म में था. It was mainly in the form of environmental determinism. ठीक है? So this type of environmentalism was present, and a kind of Gaianism, not exactly Gaianism, but a kind of Gaianism. So this is before quantitative revolution. Second, during QR. So tell me, when we are saying during quantitative revolution, हमने पीछे लिखा that environmentalism was lost. So which type of definition we were using when we were saying environmentalism was lost? We were using broader definition or the narrower definition? Tell me. When I am saying that environmentalism was lost or subverted, so we are using a narrower definition of environmentalism or the broader definition? We are using narrower definition of environmentalism, because narrowly environmentalism means environmental determinism. Okay? So that environmental determinism was gone, no doubt about that. It was subverted. But can I say there was environmentalism? Which type of environmentalism was there? Can I say here there was a more interventionism was present? Yes or no? Everything became what? Our economic needs. This was represented in the presence of economic determinism philosophy. Economic determinism philosophy. Okay? So this ecocentric environmentalism was more of a Gaianism type. So during the quantitative revolution, there was very clearly, broadly speaking, there was environmentalism, but it was a technocentric, it was interventionist environmentalism. Then third phase, after quantitative revolution. Now one more thing that you see, during these periods, tell me, during these periods, can I say this was the main approach, or I could have used the word paradigm approach? Yes or no? Even during this period, was it a main or paradigm approach? Yes, it was. Or the paradigm approach it was. Now, when after quantitative revolution, we find that variety of views began to emerge. Okay. First view which started, in fact, this view began here only. We can say this view actually during the quantitative revolution it began, and it became prominent, it became more highlighted in the late 1960s. So if you talk about late 1960s, there was what? There was criticism of QR. So during this crisis phase, there was emergence of, again re-emergence of Gaianism. There was re-emergence of Gaianism. Okay. Also there was another critical approach, and there was communism. Both are environmental approaches, abhi humne dekha tha. So during this late 1960s, what we find, there was rise of eco-centric environmentalism. Actually communist approach more grew in 1970s. So अगर उसको लिखना है तो 60s में मत लिखो, you basically इसको अलग ही कर देते हैं हम लोग. So 1970s we see that there was also birth of communist approach. ठीक है. So in the initial part of this after quantitative revolution period, there was what? Gaianism and communism. Both of them are which type of approach? Ecocentric environmentalist approach. Okay. And both of them, what is the key here? Both give greater preference to environment. Both are giving greater preference to the environment. Now tell me, if new idea emerges, should there be people who accept that idea, and then only that idea would become popular and the main approach? Yes or no? Tell me, can we say that? There should be followers ultimately for the approaches to become popular. And during this period, we find that during this period, world was divided into broadly two groups. One is, we can call it as the developed world, and the second was the case of developing world. Can I say, if you talk about developed world was habituated to very high standards of living at the expense of large ecological footprints. So they had very large big ecological footprint. But very key was what? They were habituated. So if they are habituated to such standard of living that even in winters they would require AC, tell me, can I say that they would reject such ecocentric environmentalism? Yes or no? Would they be willing to compromise with their living standards? No. So they were not willing to compromise with their living standards. So basically what happened? Thus they rejected ecocentric environmentalism. Ecocentric environmentalism was rejected by them. On the other hand, if you talk about the developing world, so developing world it aspired to reach the higher standards of living like the developed world. Like the developed world. So you can understand by this time the process of colonization already ho chuka tha, and we had already become kind of slaves. Physically to slaves the hi, but even when we became independent, we remained those mental slaves. The cultural colonialism which had taken place, nobody talked about that. For us, they remained superior always. So their way of development was always superior to us. We wanted to become like them. We didn't see that they had a different type of population resource ratio. Okay? So we aspired what? Developing countries aspired to reach those higher standards of living like the developed world. And for reaching this, what they required? For achieving it, cheaper technologies were preferred, even if they did large scale environmental degradation. Like अभी हमने कोल का एग्जाम्पल दिया था. So for these countries, environment was the development was considered more important than preserving the environment, and their logic was simple. It is also correct. Their logic was very simple, that if you look into the per capita environmental degradation, if you look into our per capita ecological footprint, it is much lower than yours, the developed countries. It was much lower than that of developed countries. Developed countries per capita ecological footprint is multifold greater than those of the developing countries. Just because here more number of people are living, essentially because of that the total footprint becomes bigger. In fact, you can understand, बाद में मैं बताऊंगा limits to growth. So actual story of limits to growth was, it was brought in to show that this developing countries population is so much harmful to the world, and so that world should take measures so that they control their population. But you also see ki how much they are like, their actual ecological footprint is very low. So many people are surviving on so much limited resources. Why don't you change your way of living? Why you have to take resources of others as well, which you have throughout done during the colonial period? So it is like something like someone is consuming lots of resources and some other people comes and ultimately फिर उसको प्रॉब्लम होने लगा कि यार why I am the only superior person. It is a kind of racial view. Only I have got like right to have this much kind of access to the resources. How they can do that? So they were limits to growth. What was actually a kind of this kind of viewpoint where they were more concerned about that how these developing countries, if the developing countries continue to grow, then we'll have to share the resources. And this would mean that our standard of living would decline. Okay? So this was the basic idea of the developing world. And clearly, what would happen because of that? So they also rejected the ecocentric environmentalism. Okay, they also rejected it. However, one thing is very clear, that the criticism from the ecocentric environmentalists continued to grow, and what happened? They highlighted many grave problems which would occur due to environmental degradation. Okay? Actually, the reason was many of the European countries were in favor of that, and countries like Canada, countries like Scandinavian countries, you can understand. Tell me, if I talk about suppose in case of US and Canada. So tell me, most of the population of Canada is located here in the marine provinces, and this is the place where industries are located. Most manufacturing industries are located in US. So tell me, when the westerly winds would blow, they would take the pollution where? They would be taking this pollution where? Where there would be more acid rain and all these type of problems. In Canada, where people are living. Same thing was happening in Scandinavia. Countries like Sweden, Norway, Finland, they were facing so much problems which was product of the industrial development which was occurring in Europe, Western Europe. So these became ultimately the leaders. They became the pioneer countries who spearheaded this ecocentric environmental revolution, and they continued. Now, because this criticism was rising, can I say that there was, in fact, we later see that due to this, we saw that there was rise of balanced views began to rise. Balanced views began to rise, and one such occasion, very important occasion, was the our common future, that is the Brundtland Commission report. Which came in late 80s, and Brundtland Commission report put forward the idea of sustainable development. Sustainable development. This sustainable development was essentially what? This is what is your accommodationism. Environmentalism. And basically, what was the key of sustainable development? That both economic development and environmental conservation can be achieved together. Can be achieved together. Okay. Now tell me, these two camps which we are talking about, what they wanted to hear. Developed and developing world camps, what they wanted to hear. Can I say that this word sustainable development would have been sounded like music to their ears? Because यही तो उनको चाहिए था. It would have sounded like a music to their ear. So it was like in 2014 Indians, so they were told 15 lakh सबके account में. So it was like music to the ears of most of the Indians. They didn't even bothered कि ये 15 लाख आएंगे कहां से. This is what everyone wanted to hear, and this is what the leader told. So same was this concept of sustainable development. Today we are talking about sustainable consumption, but that is also only theoretical. When it comes to the practical strategies of sustainable development which they are talking about, they hardly give any attention to consumption. How can you achieve sustainable development without sustainable consumption? Okay? So later we'll talk about the problems related with sustainable development concept and how they have been changing, all those things. But one thing becomes very, very clear, that this is what both the groups wanted. And can I say that as a result, it was natural. Such balanced view was welcomed by both the group of countries, both the group of countries. And you know, further some developments occurred, like for example, there was the 1992 Earth Summits, which formalized the idea of sustainable development. So Rio Summit, which was there, yes, the idea of sustainable development, it was formalized. Then you can understand other big events like 1997, the case of Kyoto Protocol, the success which was there with respect to the Rotterdam Conference, which was there. Several such events occurred. And all these paved the way for what? All these paved the way for development by late 90s. Can I say that accommodationist environmentalism emerged as the main approach or the paradigm. पहले भी हमने देखा है, after late 1990s, what has happened? Which approach became dominant? That time we were just saying environmentalism approach became the paradigm approach. Do you remember? But which type of environmentalism approach has become the main paradigm approach? It is the accommodationist environmentalism has the main paradigm approach. Okay, so today if you talk about which is the main paradigm approach, it is the accommodationist environmentalism approach which is the main paradigm approach. Okay, this much is becoming clear. Tell me, हर country का, we have sustainable development goals today. Okay, so every country has its own sustainable development commitments. And the broad policy is accommodationist policy, although they would show variety of policies depending upon the sector that we are talking about. ठीक है, like for example agriculture में भी देखो, green revolution से we are going towards the second green revolution which is more based on organic farming. So it is what? We are thinking about a more greener type of agriculture. So everywhere, most of the cases, it is accommodationist environmentalism we are talking about today. Okay, although depending upon the type of resource, we will use different approaches. Like for example, when it comes to forest resources, biotic resources, we are still using eco-centric approaches. Like for example, tell me, aren't we using Gainist approach when it comes to biotic resources? Yes or no? Aren't national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, biosphere reserves, tiger reserves, aren't the example of Gainist approach? They are example of the Gainist approach. When it comes to, you see, 1985-86, after that our policy changed and we became more environmental. After this, you very clearly see that we have invested less in the large dams. We have moved towards smaller dams, mini and micro dams. So tell me, when it is coming to mini and micro dams, isn't it a communist type of environmentalism? It is. 73rd, 74th Amendment Act. Isn't it an example of a communist type of environmentalism? We have given way towards more decentralization. So different sectors, different things are there, but the broad approach is what? The broad approach is that of the accommodationism. Okay? Now, if you have understood this, then you will be in a better position to now answer this question which we were talking about. Tell me, He is saying that there is rejuvenation of environmentalism. यहां तक तो ठीक है, we agree. Rejuvenation of environmentalism. And here environmentalism means what? Can I say here environmentalism means environmental determinism? Yes or no? Tell me. So first part of the statement, can I say we agree with the first part of the statement, but second part as a paradigm in geographical studies. Tell me, do you agree with the second statement? Has environmental determinism become the paradigm today in geographical studies? Tell me, has it become a paradigm? No. So I will, second part, what I will do, I will disagree with the statement. It has not become a paradigm. Contrary to it, it is the accommodationist, it is the technocentric environmentalism which is the dominant paradigm. ठीक है? So can you understand now how to write this answer? First part, what you will talk about? You will talk about that during the quantitative revolution, the environmental determinism was dead or it was subverted. It ceased to remain the main paradigm in geography and it was replaced by quantitative revolution and economic determinism. But after this, the problems which rose because of that, the questions which were asked, that led to rise of, again re-rise of modern environmentalism, which is ecocentric environmentalism, which was rising, and it was essentially what? It was a form of environmental determinism. ठीक है? So it was more of a form of environmental determinism. So you will talk about कि rise कैसे हुआ, जैसे हमने बात किया रेचल कार्सन्स etc etc. First part. But then you will explain, once you have written the first part, you will talk about, however, it hasn't become paradigm. It hasn't achieved the status of paradigm. It still remains what? It still remains a critical approach. It is still a critique which is present in a geography, a minor approach. Why? Because the major approach has become what? Accommodationist environmentalism or technocentric environmentalism still dominates. And you will explain, जो अभी हमने यहाँ पर लिखा था, how the changes have occurred, how the rise was there. यहाँ से you will talk about this and you will talk about that why it could not achieve the status of paradigm, because both of these had their own needs and both these groups ultimately what they did, they rejected it. ठीक है? So they preferred a more balanced viewpoint, which is essentially the sustainable development or accommodationist environmentalism. ठीक है? So can you understand how to write this answer? And one thing also you understand कि जिस भी बंदे ने इस क्वेश्चन को बनाया होगा, the teacher who made this question, can you understand the level of his knowledge? Yes or no? Can you understand the level of understanding the person would have had? ठीक है? This is actually the demand that UPSC has from you. Unfortunately, we fail in this demand and that is why we suffer. ठीक है? So this is basically what we mean by environmentalism. इसके अलावा these are the four major things which we are talking about. Others also several are there, like you see eco-terrorism. So exemplified by acts of violence, vandalism, property damage, sabotage against individuals and companies in the name of environment. You know, several groups who are like working like terrorists. The term has been used to refer to crimes committed against companies or government agencies in order to prevent the activities allegedly harmful to the environment. One is clearly the Naxalism. There is others like ecofeminism. So within feminism there is a viewpoint ecofeminism. It is referred to as intellectual and practical movement based around interaction of women and nature with specific concern relating to oppression of both are throughout the history. You will find that there is a common history of oppression of nature and women. With the rise of the masculinity, with the rise of the technological development, the one which was always marginalized, it was women. And the one who is also marginalized along with that, it was environment. And both are very closely interlinked. Welfare of women throughout history, if you look into, it has been very closely interlinked with environment. So understanding of this relationship, understanding how both of them have been sufferers, this approach is referred to as the eco-feminist approach. It visualizes that oppression of women and nature are linked historically, materially, culturally and ideologically. Okay. Bioregionalism I have already talked about. There is free market environmentalism, which is essentially nothing but it is interventionism. So it argues free market is the best tool to preserve the health and sustainability of the environment. Despite the prevalence of diverse approaches of environmentalism, it is rare to find individuals or organizations conforming completely to any of the positions identified by these approaches. And there is a danger of overemphasizing a simple dichotomy between radical and reformist environmentalism. Riordan has noted that the world does not divide neatly in ecocentric environmentalism on one hand and manipulative technocentric administrators on the other. Rather, there is a blurring of boundaries depending upon particular issue under consideration, the socio-economic context and institutional arrangements that prevail. Abhi India का example दिया that although the broad view is that of accommodationism, but we have Gaianism also, Gaianist policies also, we have communist policies also, we have interventionist policies also. Mining sector is a very best example of interventionist policy. Okay. These two extremely polarized positions, however, are recognizable in public debates about environmental concerns in the 21st century, particularly in the debates centering the idea of sustainable development. So, जो मैंने बताया question of environmentalism as a paradigm, all the things I told you, it is written here. Okay, so environmentalism is a paradigm today, no doubt about this, but it is not environmental determinism type of environmentalism, it is accommodationist or technocentric environmentalism. Okay, so this is your environmentalism. Okay, now what we have to do tomorrow के लिए, what I will do, tomorrow there will be no class, but there would be a video class tomorrow. And this video class would be on religion geography. ठीक है. So this would be on religion geography. On Monday next class होगा, and on Monday we'll finish the topic of radicalism. This is one main topic which is left. So here we'll cover this topic and we'll finish off our perspective. So इसके बाद perspective में there would be few topics left, and I'll explain you what topics would be left. One is language geography. This I will take with population geography. ठीक है, population and cultural setting topic है इंडिया में. So I'll take together population geography, I will be taking together with cultural setting, because वहाँ पर भी हमें इंडिया की languages पढ़नी है. तो I'll explain together the family of languages, all those, where they are found, and then we'll talk about how in India all the 4 families of languages are present. ठीक है. So are we clear about language geography? Tell me fast. Then there is another topic, cultural regions of world, and again in cultural setting topic of paper 2, there is another topic, cultural regions of India. So there I'll talk about how cultural regions are formed, the centrifugal forces, and then उसको apply करके दोनों वर्ल्ड और इंडिया में देखेंगे. ठीक है. One more topic which is left, which I'll not be taking here, it is Human Development Index. So this Human Development Index topic I will be taking up with economic geography. Economic geography. And in economic geography, there is one topic on measures of economic development. Measures and problems of economic development. So there is one topic, measures and problems of economic development. So वहाँ पर हमें we have to talk about HDI because HDI is one important measure of economic development which is the main paradigm measure today. So वहाँ पर तो हमें बात करना ही है. So we will not talk about separately HDI. So that means if you remove these three topics, one more topic will be left after this video class on religion geography. ठीक है. Any doubt? Ask me. So we'll stop for today. Good night to all of you. Take care. We'll meet on Monday. ठीक है. One thing is, you see, perspectives, if you have done all the classes thoroughly, if you have continuously revised, then up perspectives, I told you, I promised you that by the end you will see that all the picture would become clear. ठीक है. So by this time I am sure that all of you who followed what we said, most of the picture with respect to perspectives would have become clear. And with time, as you revise more, you will see that you will get more and more insights in the same topic. How to cover other video class topics of climatology, sir? See, again I have told you, if you feel like that you are unable to cope with that, उसको अभी छोड़ दो. You do it after we have finished the classes. First module is something which is also useful for your prelims. So उसको उस टाइम पे पढ़ोगे फरवरी मार्च में तो भी ज़्यादा प्रॉब्लम नहीं होगा, because clear the thing is that it would help you in prelims also. So that fear will not be there. First module is the main module which actually helps you in the prelims part. ठीक है. What are light and dark green approaches? Light and dark green approaches, यार, it is, I think, exactly, मुझे भी नहीं, I am coming across this term. And if you talk about, maybe dark green approach is the ecocentric and light is the technocentric approach. So like that it should be. Yes, there would be test on perspective. We'll talk about that on Monday. Okay. So we'll stop for today. Good night to all of you. We'll meet again tomorrow.